Hello, I'm Jana Pusson, one of the senior lecturers for the British Institute of Directors, here in Moscow doing some work for IDA, which represents the IoD in Moscow, in delivering all the modules which assist towards the corporate governance, finance, strategy, leadership modules, which ultimately lead to the qualification of Chartered Director, which is the first and a unique qualification held throughout the world. The purpose of this webinar is to examine why do directors sometimes do incredibly stupid things, and why do boards allow them to do stupid things. And we'll finish off perhaps on a positive note to ask ourselves what can be done, what help can we provide, and in all could it have been avoided. My formative years was in banking, and as a retail banker and ultimately corporate, I obviously lent money to small businesses, then mid-sized businesses, then corporates, before moving to some of the more big ticket stuff. And as a consequence, you assess the performance of businesses, you assess risk before you provide the finance. And occasionally you get it wrong, in the sense that the company gets into difficulty, they can't pay you back, and issues surface as a result. And early in my career, I began to show an interest as to why did companies get it wrong, or indeed, why did I get it wrong in terms of making the loan available? And what I learned over the years, certainly when I went into management consultancy, having lectured and worked in over 31 countries in over 30 years, and dealing with about 600 directors a year by the auspices of the IoD, and not to mention boards that we do consultancy work with, is this. Sometimes mistakes are unavoidable. Companies get surprised, there's a change in technology, there's a catastrophe, or very simply there's an error in judgment where people got it wrong. But sometimes when you reflect on the decision, you ask yourself, how on earth did these people make that decision? What actually possessed them to make that kind of decision? And this is what this webinar is going to explore. And this is based on a combination of personal experience and research, and by academics, research by consultancy firm, research by audit bodies. So hopefully we'll share with you our findings on the topic. I think we forget that chief executives or executives are first and foremost human beings, with all their frailties and imperfections that we all have. A recruiter once told me, you know, Jean, we advertise for CEOs and human beings turn up. And often companies forget that we don't hire resumes, we don't hire CVs, we hire people, and occasionally they come with a bit of baggage. So these are some of the findings that we've seen over the years in terms of why executives, and particularly chief executives, make some perhaps lousy calls. The first obvious one is ego, and not to be discounted. Executives can become power drunk, power hungry, and as somebody once told me, marinated in power. They love the attention, they love the exposure, and it begins to cloud their judgment a little. At the time of recording, which is February 2008, Steve Wynn of the Wynn's Hotel and Casinos in Las Vegas has left the company, or should we say, was encouraged to leave. The company bears his name, that's not unusual, but the company logo was actually his signature, which is just kind of remarkable, as egos pretty much go. Anyway, he's, as we say, moved on, or as we say, he's been made available to industry. One other factor is the question of overconfidence. Somebody becomes chief executive and they assume that they've achieved, and they can't be wrong. They are applauded, they are cheered, people laugh at their jokes, people seek their time, people seek their attention, and after a while they begin to believe that they are infallible. And we all know from experience, be it in politics, be it in sport, success is a very, very lousy teacher. Success gives you sometimes a lot of false comfort in terms of what you've achieved. And as a consequence, the decisions become made on gut, on opinion. They rely less and less on the facts. And as somebody once told me many years ago, You know, Jean, organizations and individuals are slow learners and fast forgetters. They forgot what made them successful. And as a consequence, we get people making really some unbelievably dumb decisions. There are many, many other reasons, and we'll walk you through a couple as we go along. The concept of mental accounting, what we mean there is to justify a decision, say for an investment, they pick a barometer which is totally inappropriate. And over my career, I've had people tell me this, well, Jean, this proposed investment is only 1% of group sales, when in fact group sales is not an apt barometer. So they pick a huge big number somewhere to justify the percentage number, to justify their decision and to get it through the board. And we call this mental accounting, where some people call it creative, but I call it mental accounting in the sense of fudging the judgment to make the decision look perhaps a bit more palatable. Another issue which often besets executives is what I call the status quo. There's a lovely phrase in the English language or a sentence, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, where people have taken the view, it is working, our sales figures are good, the financial numbers stack up, the order book is encouraging, our customers love us, we do well in any surveys, change absolutely nothing. Now, that could well be so, but we really question boards on a regular basis to do just that, to challenge the status quo before competitors challenge it on your behalf. Another concept which we've learned over the years is what we call mental anchoring. And this is very simply, I've made up my mind. I remember running a workshop for a business many years ago, and I was facilitating a board strategy review and making some contributions where I felt it was appropriate. And at some point I suggested to the board, well, have you considered maybe acquisitions perhaps, given the strategic intent and where the company was going? And the chairman stopped me dead in my tracks and said, Jean, we don't do acquisitions, it's high risk. To which I replied, yes, I understand the risk of an acquisition, but surely it's something, given where you are in your sort of history, it should be considered. He didn't even let me continue the conversation. He had made up his mind, acquisitions are high risk and we do not do acquisitions. And I recall as we broke for a tea and coffee break, one of the directors approached me and says to me, Jean, please don't mention the A word, i.e. acquisitions. The chairman had made up his mind and the conversation ended there. We call this mental anchoring. I've made up my mind, please go away. Another factor which sometimes causes people to do silly things is what we call the sunk cost effect. In banking, in retail banking or corporate banking, when you lend money, when you make loans and finance available to businesses, there's a saying which goes something like this: your first loss is always your best loss. I.e., if you've made a bad call, do not throw good money after that because you've made a bad call. It will just get sunk and get subsumed away together with your first investment. Rather, go and recoup that investment somewhere else. And we see this in organizations. Decisions are based on judgment, on personal opinion, and therefore it is to that executive's ambition to actually see the investment through. So they throw money, they throw money, they throw more money, and we call this a sunk cost effect. Sometimes you are best to walk away and go and recoup your investment. Yeah, but emotions stick in, personalities stick in, and we have what we have. Another facet of executive malaise is what we call strategic herding. And this is where, well, everyone's doing it, therefore we have to. It is a human condition to follow others. But as we tell boards on a regular basis, strategy should not be like fashion. Fashion means I want to be like everybody else. And yes, maybe there are industry trends. Yes, maybe there are movements that de facto you have to follow suit. But It is not a preconditioned strategic choice. Please give it some thought. Sometimes you need to question, do I have to follow others? And this is particularly prevalent when a competitor makes a move and the executives feel they absolutely have to respond. I'll never forget watching one of the Godfather movies many years ago. In Godfather 3, there's a famous scene where the Godfather, played by Al Pacino, is about to retire and he's handing over the reins to his successor, played by a young actor called Andy Garcia. And some deal had gone bad and Andy Garcia wanted to maim, kill, destroy, etc. And Pacino, the Godfather, literally grabs him and tells him, Michael, do not hate your enemy. It clouds your judgment. This is business, and we will make a considered business response. The same applies in business. Don't hate your competitors. Don't try and outdo them on a regular basis. It should not be like that. It is business. So when we have to have a competitive riposte, it should be done intelligently, it should be done purposefully, not out of rage and out of anger. And regrettably, sometimes executives fall in that trap. So, Godfather, don't hate your enemy. Another example of executive making mistakes is what we call not really examining the worst case scenario. When we look at risk assessments, when we look at worst case scenarios, when we look at financial planning, models, budgeting, forecasting, etc., far too often, even the worst case is far too comfortable. The worst case justifies survival, the worst case justifies we carry on. And often what boards, and sometimes we encourage them to have those very difficult conversations. We tell boards, go to the dark side and really look at the real worst case scenario. If you were an airline, what if your fleet was grounded for 30 days because of some technical kind of issue? If you were a food manufacturer, what if there was a contamination that actually meant you could not produce for 30 or 60 days? I mean, these are scenarios which are sometimes very plausible. What if your supply chain, by virtue of being so fragmented, ended up where there was a problem where your counterparty had issues with their counterparties which indirectly affected you? Now, those scenarios need to be played out. Boards, executives need to go to the dark side. But if you show the dark side, if you show the real worst case scenario, which means non-existence of a business, it's not a conversation people tend to be very comfortable with, but we need to have that conversation. Human beings, again, pride. And this manifests itself in so many different ways. Yahoo was sold just over 2 years ago, although the deal was only completed last year because of the cyber hack, for about $4 billion approximately to Verizon. A few years back, Microsoft offered to buy the business for $45 billion. And the founders, out of pride, refused to sell to Microsoft on the mistaken belief that they could do better. And of course they haven't. 45 billion became 4 billion, or possibly a figure less, because the full price, I don't think, was finally disclosed. Talk of the cost of pride, talk of the cost of destroying shareholder value. But again, it's human nature. It's human nature. Other things we observe is what we call executive derailment. And when we do our one-to-one coaching with directors, or indeed senior managers, we make the point. When you look at your career over time, if you can visualize a graph, the level of technical contribution expected from you as you achieve more and more seniority goes down. And the level of managerial and strategic contribution over time goes up. Many directors do not make the crossover. This is the CFO or the finance director saying, I absolutely need to be au fait with every single accounting standards out there and latest discussion papers. This is the HR director saying employment law is my thing. I need to be so absolutely, totally and completely up to date with employment law. You get to a point when you become a director where you have to start dumping technical knowledge because there are other people who will do that for you, and you need to concentrate on becoming a proper director and busying yourselves and occupying your mind with things beyond some of the technical minutiae which have served you well over the years. And I really understand how that is difficult, because if you're technically minded and your career has been built on technical know-how, now that you've progressed, to actually have to dump that and to almost relinquish that to somebody else can be very, very difficult, but you have to. I recall a delegate many years ago telling me he was marketing director of a small business, and it had been talked about that he would take over from the managing director, him from marketing to managing director. The managing director fell ill. His illness was far more serious than was first thought, and it was terminal cancer, and the poor man died not long afterwards. So his elevation, i.e. the marketing director, was rushed. He said to me, Jean, I went from Friday marketing director to Monday managing director. I spent Monday, Tuesday moving into the new office, getting to know my PA, promoting someone to take over my function as marketing, handing over properly. And this took about 2-3 days. And once I was fully in situ, once I was fully in the position of managing director, I just didn't know what to do. It was very quiet. It certainly was very, very lonely. Nobody was bugging me. And I found that very, very, very uncomfortable. But what I did know was I could not go back and start speaking to my customers, to my staff as I would. I had to learn to become a managing director. Very wise, very, very sensible. And last I heard, he was doing very well for himself. He did not allow himself to be derailed. He made that elevation from technical to managing director. I recall Bill Gates speaking on the IoD a few years ago when he was still at Microsoft, telling us, if people don't want to go into management, they have a right not to want to go into management. Don't force people into management. We need technicians, and we need very good technicians. And he made the point that some of our top nerds, his words not mine, Amaya, we pay them as much as we pay our executive VP because they are worth it. So we have to respect people's intentions, not to want to go. Don't push, don't force people into positions that they will actually sort of hate. Other research tells us, again, because of the ego, it's a basic human condition, the power hungriness and all that, the chief executive begins to merge into the company. They become the company. When they speak about the company, they speak in the first person I. They identify themselves totally with the company. They become the company. And again, this begins to cloud their judgment. Like Julius Caesar, they develop tired ears. They stop listening, or they don't hear properly what people tell them. They think they are above criticism, they are above critique, and that typically tends to end very, very badly. And they also think sometimes, as a result of success, that they have all the answers. I'm chief executive, I'm the brightest one in the lot. And you see this when you do board work, where every time a director makes a statement, the interruption is guaranteed to come from the chief executive, where he or she will correct every single statement. And instead of allowing the conversation to flow, and instead of admitting that, maybe he or she knows more than me on that topic, they have to make a point. They think they have all the answers. And this is very prevalent when you have a situation where there's a crisis, where there is a situation that the chief executive or maybe the board members have not faced before. They think they can get themselves out of the situation. And we'll touch on that point later about the humility that executives must show to recognize that we have some capabilities, but we may be lacking in some capabilities, and therefore professional help should be sought in those particular sort of issues. Another byproduct of that confidence factor is that they really underestimate major obstacles. We have always resolved things, we have always done good, we know how to react, and we'll handle this one as well. Not every problem has the same variables, and the way in which they react to issues and crises is often dependent on how they solve the last one, and they often do not fully grasp what's at stake there in front of them. Sometimes I call this the déjà vu principle. We are all prisoners of our own experience, and as we keep telling our clients, experience is great as long as the future resembles the past. And often executives preface a statement by saying, when I was at. Now, experience is sometimes to be cherished, but it might not always work. And we call this the déjà vu principle, where there's a toolkit in there that says, this is how we handle this, this is how we resolve this. No guarantee. There is no guarantee that the new problem will have the same variables as the old problem, and maybe the solution administered last time may not work this time. And sometimes they dive in with resolve and with fortitude, and it doesn't work. Being number one can be very addictive. Through history, we see people not wanting to relinquish power. Power can be a drug, power can be a very, very nice place to be. And this often manifests itself in executives staying on too long. At the time of this recording, which is February 2008, a few months ago in America, Disney acquired the assets, or some of the assets, of 21st Century Fox, some of the cinema and TV assets. The chief executive of Disney is a chap called Bob Iger, who was appointed in 2005, initially on a 5-year contract, i.e. his term of office should have expired in 2010. That's been renewed 5 times. And the latest renewal will see him serve, on paper at least, till 2021. Now, nothing against Mr. Iger. Disney is a well-run company and he's doing a great job. But this is a very similar refrain that we see. People just do not want to walk away. Founders particularly, having created a business, are loath to see it fall into any other hands because it's their baby. And they feel they have a divine right to keep at the helm when often we need new people. Business often teaches us new risks and new issues that we have not thought through. There was a disaster in America on one of BP's rigs in the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago, where there was an explosion and people died. And there are many lessons to be learned from that crisis and the recovery, which has cost BP dearly. There's now an infamous statement by the chief executive who said, I want my life back. And it was perceived to be selfish, it was perceived to be insensitive when people had died, and he had to leave. But what is not well told is the question of what we call CEO exhaustion, where in times of crisis, chief executives end up working all hours of day and night. And at some point, that fatigue, that relentless burst of energy has to finish. And when people get really, really tired, or in his case, exhausted, the decision making becomes blurred, becomes a bit cloudy, and people start to begin to say stupid things. And that's pretty much what happened in this case. As we tell chief executives, sleep deprivation is not a badge of honor. That you tell me you work so many hours a day, a week, and sleep very little really does not impress me. So CEO exhaustion or executive exhaustion is often a risk which is not captured in risk registers, but it is very, very, very real. So faced with all those potential issues that companies experience, how can boards allow these things to happen? You'd think a board of directors is a team of highly paid, highly intelligent people. So how can they collectively allow singular behavior like this to actually cause untold damage to businesses? We call this behavior risk, i.e., who is making the decisions at board level? We know board minutes, we know board papers, but really, when you observe the dynamics of a board meeting, is there one person or sometimes a small group of persons who perhaps have far too much influence on the overall decision-making body of the company? We call this behavior risk. Again, it is human nature to follow success. And if you have followed a chief executive who has done you good, you could understand why the board and board members will be far less questioning of his or her next decision because so far they've done great. And what experience teaches us with executives is the next deal has to be bigger, because otherwise it gets a bit boring, and they get bigger and they get bigger. We also find executives in the latter part of their careers wishing to leave a legacy. So they begin to get a bit distracted, to get involved in philanthropic ventures, which is not a bad thing, by the way, but they often get a bit distracted from the business of running the business. And the board members don't keep them in check. And the next acquisition, the next venture, the next investment has to be a biggie, because they want to say, and we have so many examples of executives who said they were going to retire, but then they stay for that last deal, and they have to consummate the last deal, and often that last deal is very, very big. The classic example that we have quoted so many times is with the English bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, where the chief executive, Fred Goodwin, was allowed to almost single-handedly go through an acquisition. Let me rephrase. Go through the biggest acquisition in the bank's history with almost no checks and balances. That it didn't sink the bank, but it caused the bank to be recapitalized and is currently owned by the taxpayer with all sorts of issues. Now, we can blame Mr. Goodwin for his ego and for a whole range of things. The board has to take some blame as well. What were these people doing? Where were the checks and balances? And it is now recommended in the UK anyway, within the financial services sector, that audit committees should have the power to block big deals exactly because of that. Also, a recommendation post the UK banking crisis is that the audit committee should be able to interview what they consider senior people who resigned or got sacked, like head of risk, head of internal audit, if they clash with somebody else for fairly obvious reasons. They might have been privy to something that perhaps the rest of the committee would very much like to hear. There are many reasons why boards malfunction or why boards don't work well, and it's not the objective of this webinar to go through that, but it is worth a quick mention for now. Some boards are dysfunctional. Some boards don't work as well as they should. And again, this is the subject of another webinar. But if you have a board that doesn't work, executive mistakes go unpunished. Executive behavior goes unchecked. And as I've told people many times on boards, if not in life, in business, you get what you tolerate. If you allow somebody to behave in that way, then you have to take some of the blame yourself. A key And one or two quick issues. Often inexperienced board members just don't have the know-how to handle difficult people like that, especially new appointees to the board who feel, I want to keep my powder dry, I need to understand the dynamics, and they're perhaps not as forceful in the early months or periods of their tenure as perhaps they should. We talk on all our courses about the principle of groupthink, where we believe in each other, where there's an absolute belief that the group is right. We don't tolerate dissenters, we don't tolerate dissent, we don't tolerate contradiction. And groupthink and groupthink creep is something we watch very, very avidly in boards, because otherwise decisions are not sufficiently challenged, and executives driven by ego, power, etc. get away with stuff like that. So what can be done to actually put in place some kind of corrective measures? Well, you would hope that the chairman has sufficient gravitas, intellect, control, and skills to actually rein in a chief executive who's behaving in that manner. You would hope, but sometimes not. You would hope that non-executive directors would constructively challenge such behavior. And that doesn't have to be combative, but they are there to provide a sensible and intelligent check and balance to those kinds of behaviors, and that's where they do their best work, in their committees and in those boardrooms. It might be a good thing for an executive, CEO otherwise, to get a coach and a mentor, just to have someone to bounce ideas off. We often recommend, if time permits, that the chief executive maybe take a non-executive position somewhere else, which is not too demanding, just to expose him or her to another board dynamics, different people, and perhaps a different style of practice and a different style of board. That's sometimes recommended. We do a lot of board evaluation work at the IoD, and that takes many forms and guises. But we really, really like the opportunity to do one-to-one with directors. Because when you do one-to-one with directors, you can really ask searching and probing questions. Questions like, what are people saying behind your back? Forms and systems talk. What are people saying behind your back? What do you think are people saying your back? Questions like, what would make people not get on with you? Why don't people get on? Do you get on with most people? You can really provoke a lot of questioning, which, if anything else, will make the folk think. There are many peer-to-peer groups throughout the world where executives would spend a day a month with other chief executives of non-competing industries, so there's no risk, to share ideas, to share problems. And these can be quite hard-hitting in terms of feedback, but extremely, extremely invaluable and really, really good learning. Bill Gates once asked Peter Drucker, the famous management writer, who's sadly passed on now, where do you get the time? How do you find the energy, the resources to write so many good books? To which Peter Drucker said, I make time to think. And Bill Gates followed his advice, and when he was at Microsoft, on a regular basis, he would isolate himself in a log cabin somewhere. No distractions, no phone, no TV, no nothing, just to think. To unclutter the mind of all the debris, of all the hubris, of all the operational issues, to give yourself time to think for yourself, for your board, and for your organization. I've seen boards, and this is a practice we recommend, by the way, after each board meeting, and a different person takes that role. After each board meeting, that person says, right, let's give ourselves feedback. How did we do today? How did this board meeting work? And they give each other frank, honest feedback on each board meeting with a view to improving. So that's the kind of check and balances that can work. There's a company in Japan which I saw, and they do something very clever. Once a year at the AGM, every director has to face the shareholders and say, these have been my accomplishments during the year, and this is why I should be re-elected as a director. Almost like a political manifesto. New appointees get a bit of tolerance in their first year, but once a year, you have to justify to your shareholders why they should keep you back on. And that and all the solutions I mentioned, hopefully and collectively, will make for a better board, for better dynamics, and hopefully for better behavior and for better chief executives. Thank you for listening. Do have a look at our website. We have a hell of a lot more there. And the final suggestion is the IoD in Britain came up last year with a director competency framework, i.e. all the qualities which a director should have. And they contain technical qualities, but also soft capabilities. It's on the IoD's website at www.iod.com. Please do go and have a look. You will find it a useful tool for your personal life, for your experience, and going forward. Thank you for watching.